Hey there, Duke fans. Episode 789 of Basketball Roundup. This is an unfamiliar voice. I should probably reintroduce myself because I can't imagine any of you know who I am.
Who is that guy?
Yeah, what's going on? It's Jason Evans, back from 2 weeks in Africa. I'm with Donald Wine. Scott Rich. Scott, I want to thank you, buddy, for filling in for me, doing a great job. I listened, Donald, to all the episodes while I was away. Did a lot of listening on airplanes. There was one day where I was on planes for like 20 hours.
That sounds right. Yep.
Yeah. So there was a lot of podcast listening happening. But yeah, Scott did a wonderful job, and I'm so appreciative of him. Appreciative of the audience for not being pissed off at me for taking the trip of a lifetime. I will tell you very, very quickly, there is nothing on this planet quite like being 2 or 3 feet away from a 400-pound gorilla that could rip you apart in a heartbeat if it wanted to, but frankly is more interested in the leaves that it's eating than anything that you're doing. So it was really, really incredible, man. Just a fabulous trip.
Yeah, I'm glad you were able to take it. Welcome back. Again, thank you to Scott for filling in for the last couple of weeks. And we'll have Scott back on, obviously, down the line. We have a Michigan game next month where he will be useful in the preparation for that game. But I just want everyone to know out there that Jason went all the way to Africa and ain't bring me back nothing. Not a single thing. He sent me pictures, but he ain't bring me back no water from Lake Victoria. He ain't bring me back a leaf, nothing. So just saying.
I will tell you what I have, and I will hold on to some of it for you for the next time we are together. I have tea.
Ooh.
Yes. So one of the places that we stayed at by the chimpanzees in Rwanda is a tea farm. And my wife and I took like a little lesson in tea. And we found out that the tea that you like, the Lipton stuff, the stuff that you normally drink, crap. It's nothing. It's horrid. It is the most disgusting tea on the planet. I got the good stuff. I got the stuff this was like $20 for like a couple ounces of tea. This is the really, really hard to make it tea. And I tasted some of it and I went, I don't know what this is, but this is not the tea that I've ever had in my lifetime. It was amazing. I promptly bought a whole bunch of it. My wife was like, you're overpaying. This is the most expensive tea in the world. I'm like, I don't care. This stuff is great. So Donald, next time we are together, sir, I will serve you some fine Rwandan tea that is outstanding. Like I said, it is unlike any tea you've ever tasted in your life.
I've had some Rwandan, I guess, like potato vodka, which was quite interesting. But yeah, I'm a big fan of tea. Would love to try some. That would be great. And just for the feds out there listening, we are talking about actual drink tea, no other substances here. Jason's not smuggling anything to me. So, but no, that'd be cool. Next time we see
these are not code words or anything like that. Right. It is the real thing. All right. We've had a pleasant, fun time laughing and joking about my trip to Africa. But while I was away, my phone was blowing up. I was blowing up your phone with all the news about Duke football. And that is what we are here to talk about on this episode. Specifically, Darian Mensah or Duke versus Darian Mensah, I should say. That's the proper phrasing of the lawsuit. This lawsuit that has been filed in just the past 24 hours or so. We didn't come on. We toyed with the idea of coming on last night, Tuesday night, shortly after the lawsuit had been filed and discussing it. But we wanted to get a lawyer, an expert in contract law, to come on with us and discuss everything that he found in this very fascinating document. I'm speaking of none other than Donald Wine.
I needed to read, y'all. That's what happened. Yes, there's a lot to take from this, so I had to read it all.
Yeah. So rather than bringing on an outside expert, we have an expert with us in-house. Donald is a professional attorney who spends a lot of time reading documents, and reading documents is essential to understanding what it is Duke has asked for, what it is the courts have granted them so far, and also thinking about what it is Darian Mensah may say in response, because all of this is influential not just for Duke, but for the entire sport of college football. I would argue perhaps also for the entire sport of college basketball. This is a major case involving athlete freedom to go where they want, schools' freedom to ensure that things that athletes promise them those promises will be kept. There's just a million and 50 implications to all of this. Again, Donald, you're the expert. Let me start off by saying to you, as you read through A, the complaint that Duke filed with the court, and B, the contract, which was included in that complaint. This is the contract. I don't think we've ever seen anything like this before in the public sphere. The NIL contract that Darian Mensah signed, also signed by Nina King of Duke University. This was a contract entered into last July. And Duke says this binds Darian Mensah to us for 2 years. The final date is December 31st of 2026. I guess there'd be some question as to whether Darian, if Duke was in a New Year's Day bowl game or if Duke was in the college football playoff and it extended into 2027. I guess there's some questions as to, whether there would be some additional payments required. I don't know. I don't want to get into all that. But in any event, why don't you tell me what you have found? Just take us through the facts that were filed with the court and what it all means.
So before I get into that, let me say a couple of things. The first thing is, looking at this case, Jason, as football fans, as fans of Duke, as alums, there's the natural disposition for people to get emotional about what they want out of this case. And you and I are going to talk about that a little bit later. What we want to get out of this case, what we want to see happen emotionally. Like, as a fan, as a alum of Duke, and as a supporter of Duke football, what do we want from this? The law does not care about emotion. In theory, it takes emotion out of that equation. And so the emotion thing will be the words that you're about to hear come out of my mouth might be something that you may not want emotionally. And the only thing that lawyers and doctors have in common is if we don't like the answer that a lawyer or doctor gives us, our natural disposition emotionally is to run and find a second opinion. You're welcome to do that. But this is how I'm interpreting things from what I'm reading. And again, using my background and also, again, trying to shed the knowledge or the emotion out of it. The other thing I will say is some of this is going to be legalese. I'm going to try and put it into layman's terms as much as I possibly can, but sometimes that's not quite possible. So bear with me if it feels like this is a little bit verbose. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I will try to jump in at places where I'm like, wait a second, what does that mean? Because I am not a lawyer.
Correct.
So I'll be able to hopefully steer you down the straight and narrow so everyone understands. Go for it, sir.
So let's start with a very simple question. What is Duke asking for? So Duke has filed what is called a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction. What they're trying to do basically is say, hey, Darian Mensah is violated, has breached this contract, and because of that, we are in harm right now, immediately and in perpetuity, and we want damages. What do they want? They want basically to say that the court to say that Darian Mensah can't enter the transfer portal, that he can't enroll at another school, that he can't play football at another school, and that he can't license his NIL anywhere else. That Duke has this right via the contract that they both agreed to, and that for the next year until December 31st, 2026, every part of what I just said should be Darian Mensah at Duke University. Now, that's interesting because, again, we'll talk about the emotions part of it. They're basically saying we want to control his NIL rights and we want him to stay at Duke to play football and not play football or use his NIL anywhere else. Those may be contradicting in several ways, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But right now, let's talk about what the court has already ruled. And this is also interesting. There was a hearing yesterday, Tuesday, very, very quickly after this was filed for the temporary restraining order portion. It's, again, to put something in place to preserve the status quo of this case until it is held and until we're able to discuss it in full.
Right. And we should note that this is important because Duke would suffer irreparable harm if Darian Mensah enrolls at Miami or some other school. If he picks some other school, goes to some other school, begins practicing football, taking classes, all kinds of other stuff. That's the kind of thing that once that happens, the ship has kind of sailed. It makes it extremely difficult to unwind that. So Duke is saying, hey, court, hold on a second. Don't let him do these things because there's no coming back from this. So it's not surprising that Duke made that argument.
And what's interesting about this, and we were going to talk about this in a little bit, but in this complaint, this is Duke University versus Darian Mensah. The University of Miami And any other school is not a part of this right now because as it stands right now, Darian Mensah has not officially entered the transfer portal. He's going to be in a couple hours, as I mentioned in a second, and he hasn't signed with another school. So there hasn't been any breach or tortious interference that you've seen online. There hasn't been that yet by another school. This is Duke versus Darian Mensah, the football player. So again, they had a hearing yesterday, and Judge Michael Ofugula ruled on the TRO almost immediately, and he said this. He said, one, Darian Mensah cannot sign an NIL deal, enroll, or play football for another school until the preliminary injunction is heard, which will be in a couple weeks. Darian Mensah also cannot take any other action that would, quote, interfere with, diminish, or impair Duke University's exclusive rights under the contract, end quote. So that means his people can't talk to anybody else. He can't talk to another school. But the judge also said that all of those things that they say that he can't do right now does not preclude Duke from entering him into the transfer portal. So by 11:59 p.m. tonight on Wednesday, Duke must put Darian Mensah's name into the transfer portal. So that part is happening at some point, and I'm sure Duke will have some sort of statement when that comes out. Now, Oflugula is going to recuse himself and already has recused himself from the rest of this case because coincidentally, he is an Iron Duke and a Duke basketball season ticket holder. He's also married to a Duke librarian. So the conflict of interest has rendered him out, but I guess he had enough to rule against Duke in a lot of different ways in this particular case, or at least the temporary restraining order.
Would you say, I'm not a lawyer. I would say that his initial rulings give Duke a lot of things that Duke would like. I mean, yes, he said you have to put Mensah in the portal, but he also said Mensah can't pick another school. Mensah can't license his NIL rights. He essentially froze Darian. He said, put him in the portal. But once he's in the portal, he can't really do anything until there's been additional hearings. Don't you agree?
Yes, but there's also, again, Duke is asking for all these things. The real piece of that was putting him in the transfer portal. Because once he's in the transfer portal, then schools can contact Darian Mensah without it being tampering or a breach of contract on Darian Mensah's part. He may not be able to contact other schools. But once you're in the transfer portal, that means schools can talk to you. And I think that's where Duke is saying we can't hold on to our rights the way that we want to if he's able to be put in the transfer portal. So this is a win and a loss for Duke in the temporary restraining order area.
I don't know. I think, look, I know that no one wants to violate a judge's orders. And I know that Darian Mensah's representatives understand, what is legal and what is not. But honestly, I mean, like saying, oh, these schools couldn't talk. These schools have been talking to Darian Mensah already and his family and his representatives and the such, even though that's yeah. So I don't know that putting him in the portal is that huge a thing for Duke to lose. The prominent thing that Duke, as I said a moment ago, the prominent thing that the court ruling gives is Darian Mensah can't go anyplace else until after there are additional hearings and additional court rulings. For the moment, he is somewhat bound to Duke, although I don't think he's in Durham taking classes. In fact, I think that in the end,
in Florida.
Yeah, I think that unless the courts move really, really fast, or unless there's some kind of settlement that happens the next few days, the spring semester is going to be one where Darian Mensah is not enrolled at any school. That'd be my bet.
Well, I think also he might still be enrolled at Duke because he has not unenrolled from Duke. Since he's already there, he doesn't have to enroll again. He's already there. So he probably has classes on a schedule that he's not showing up to. But I think the key here is yes,
drop out as your friend. Drop out as your friend.
Yeah, but I think pass fail. But I think the thing about it is people are going to look at this and say this is a win for Duke. It's not a full win, right? Like 85% may be passing, but it's not 100%. What Duke wanted, the big key here is that yes, Jason, you're thinking about all the schools that have probably contacted Darian Mensah prior to him entering the portal, but Duke has not sued any other school for tampering. Think about that. They have not sued anybody for tampering because, in theory, the agent could have reached out to another school and say, hey, if my client was to enter the portal, How interested would you be in him? And all these, but now if he does enter the portal, which he's supposed to by 11:59 tonight, schools can contact him directly without violating the court order. Darian Mensah and his agent and everybody may not be able to negotiate with him, but they can still send offers. That's still something that can happen. And again, it's a question of whether that's going to happen. But there's some schools who see Darian Mensah in the portal, and even with the case, we've seen that some teams just don't care, right? So they're going to get some of that. It may not be a big deal for Duke, but there's a reason why Duke didn't want him in the portal. It's because they didn't want that part to happen. So it's still a win, and it's still a loss. You can weigh what the again, the balances of justice is. Like, yeah, we got most of what we want. I'm cool. Again, that's an emotional thing. But on the legal side of things, this is not a total win for Duke.
Okay. I just don't know that it's that huge a deal compared to the court saying, but he can't go anywhere yet. From Duke's standpoint, from what we've heard, and in fact, Duke even cited this in the complaint, the offer from Miami is so huge that the fact that Mensah can once he enters the portal can presumably talk to other teams. I don't know that it matters that much. They're just not. They're not other teams that can. I mean, anyway, let's move on. We're getting bogged down.
Wait about that, because that's important. Because what they put in the complaint is the tweet that everyone has seen, right, about the $10 million deal, the buyout of the contract. The first of all, I will say that everyone is sourcing that one tweet. There has been no other major.
It could be entirely wrong. I agree.
Could be entirely wrong what's happening here, right? And it also, again, I've heard through the grapevine that there are other schools that have contacted him offering similar things, but obviously didn't get out as quickly as this Miami thing did.
Right.
So the idea, though, is with Darian Mensah, his agent probably, again, reached out to set that up. And maybe even Miami wasn't a part of it, right? It could have been intermediaries trying to do this. That happens a lot, too. But I will say that, again, that part is an emotional thing. That does not stop anyone from contacting Mensah once he's in the portal and saying, I know you have this $10 million offer here, or you might not. But once this is panned out, we could offer you more. There's nothing to stop them from fielding calls, just like the dead period for recruiting for high school, right? Where they can contact coaches, and coaches would go, okay, yeah, sure, I'll talk to you because you initiated the conversation. So let's get to the crux of what is happening here. And it all centers around this exclusive contract. And what basically Duke has said, or in this contract, and Jason, I know you read it, I've read it as well. There's an exclusive contracts clause that basically makes it where Mensah has promised that he will not make a similar commitment of NIL licensing through a letter of intent or through entering the portal to enroll at or compete in athletics for another collegiate institution. Now, the other thing, and we'll talk about this on the emotional side of things, the other thing that it also says is if he decides to declare for the NFL draft, he still can't make any similar commitments with regards to NIL. And I'll talk about why that's important a little bit later. But the breach here is by him entering the portal, and the way they used that tweet about what was being offered was Duke is using that as evidence that Mensah's people clearly were talking to somebody else, which is in violation of the contract. It does not matter what was offered. It does not matter what he's agreed to. What matters is that his agents, his family, his representatives, what have you, whoever, was talking to another school to try and get Mensah to enter the transfer portal and go somewhere else in violation of this exclusive contract. So that's where it's being kind of hinged around. The other thing is this, and I know you've heard this even in Africa because this was a big deal on Friday. Duke has measures for terminating the contract, and they said that within the contract, they're alleging that they have the exclusive right to cancel this contract, not Darian Mensah. Now, some people have asked if this is something that's enforceable under North Carolina law. Contracts are meant to protect both parties, so shouldn't there be ways for both parties to get out of the deal? Yes, this is still enforceable because there's no specific clause for termination for convenience, which would be an at-will assignment. Like if you've heard that term, at-will employment. I can fire you, Jason, for no reason. You can quit for no reason, and everybody walks away. There's no notice period or what have you. a lot of times those are written into contracts saying, hey, if you want to enter the transfer portal, you're going to give, 15 days notice or something like that, so that Duke can prepare for you leaving to enter the transfer portal, that sort of thing. So there is a measure and a mechanism for Duke to terminate this contract, also to withhold money for a breach of contract. But none are included for Mensah, and Mensah has to, his lawyers are going to have to argue why he should be able to exit this contract without penalty. That is going to be something very hard for him to do.
Yeah. So let me ask you from the standpoint, of a lawyer reading through this contract. It seems to me like Darian Mensah wanting to enter the portal and go to a different school, and we're not going to get into what school it is or anything like that. It seems like that is a breach, that the contract was written in a way that binds Darian Mensah to Duke until December 31st, 2026, and that Darian Mensah's last second move into the portal, and even if he got a much better offer from some other school, he had entered into a contract. And do you see anything in the contract that you go, oh, this would this clears the way for Darian Mensah to go where he wants? Or does it feel like he's going to have to come up with some really creative arguments to get out of this?
So looking at the contract, I didn't see anything that would tell me that, oh, here's your exit strategy here. I was like, here's all he has to kind of invoke clause 3-4 or whatever.
Right.
There's nothing explicitly written in here that gives Darian Mensah a way to get out of this deal, at least from what I'm seeing. And that is what Duke is alleging, right? They're basically saying that he can't terminate this deal. He signed for 2 years, and there's no way for him there's no mechanism for him to break this contract, only for us to do so. And again, he could do that as discretion. If you think back to 3 weeks ago when he decided that he was going to come back to Duke, which is also listed as kind of a
right, it's part of the timeline. Yeah,
it's part of the timeline, but also as part of the Duke's claim that he reaffirmed that he was going to abide by this deal, and then while this was happening, he was clearly negotiating with somebody else in breach of that contract. So they're kind of setting up this thing saying, hey, all these things are happening because he has clearly intended to breach this contract and has breached this contract. But also with regards to with regards to Mensah declaring that he was going to come back, if you remember, there was really two options that people said that he was considering: coming back to Duke or entering the NFL draft.
Right.
In theory, Duke could release him from this if he had said back then, hey, I want to enter the transfer portal. There may have been an amicable resolution because Duke could mitigate their damages by going after another quarterback. And sure enough, they're still doing that right now. And honestly, that is what part of Mensah is going to allege is, hey, the specific performance of this contract, which means specific performance means doing what is in this contract, that you're forcing me to stay at Duke and be a football player for Duke as opposed to going somewhere else because of this exclusive clause. A lot of courts don't like to do that. A lot of courts don't like to limit the movement of people in employment matters. That's why we've seen non-compete clauses kind of go away over the last few years. But I think he's going to allege that because Duke is still looking in the portal for different quarterbacks, that they're mitigating that damage of not having a starting quarterback. And now it's just about monetary damages, which, again, if you believe the tweet about what was being offered to him in Miami, that included money to kind of, quote, buy out this deal. There may not be a buyout, but monetary damages is part of this equation. And what Darian Mensah is going to try and do is say, okay, let's go to arbitration. Let's get out of the court thing. The court should rule that we haven't had arbitration yet, so there's nothing to be aggrieved by yet because nothing has happened in arbitration. There's nothing where Duke says, hey, arbitration did get us what we want. So let's go to arbitration as per the contract, and let's figure out the monetary solution for me to be done with this so that I can go on and you can go on.
Yeah, and it's worth noting we haven't talked about that yet. We've followed this case really, really closely. There are probably people out there listening to us right now who aren't aware that the contract that Darian Mensah and Duke signed says, hey, if there are any problems, if there's any dispute, let's go to arbitration. We both agree in advance to binding arbitration. Binding meaning once it's done, once the arbitrator makes a decision, you cannot say, no, I don't like that. It's set in stone. And courts have backed that up many, 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 many times. You agree to binding arbitration, which both parties have in advance of signing this contract, then you must do what the arbitrator says. And part of what Duke has alleged here, part of what they've said is, hey, courts, let us go to arbitration. I think that says to me, by the way, that Duke is very confident in their position, that they're like, hey, the contract says we should arbitrate this. So courts, don't let him go anyplace. Don't let him cause harm. Let us go off and arbitrate this, because I think Duke thinks that if there's an arbitration, they feel pretty good about them winning that arbitration. Donald, let me ask you one more question, and then we're going to take a break and we'll get into the emotional side of things, as you said. My question to you is this. Do you think, from the standpoint of a lawyer, that the courts or an arbitrator would say Darian Mensah is bound to Duke and cannot leave? Or would they say, if Darian Mensah wants to leave Duke, there are damages that need to be paid to Duke? Because I think that there are some folks associated with Duke. There are some Duke fans who are like, hey, maybe we can force him to play for us. I know that that's not fashionable. No one wants that. You want a player to be invested in your team, blah, 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 blah. But in theory, you could say, if Darian Mensah wants to play football, and he does want to play football, he has to play for Duke or he cannot play for anyone else. Or do you think a court would say, okay, Mensah has violated this contract, but he can go where he wants. He can ply his trade where he wants, which courts usually will allow you to do that. But there are damages to Duke, and that there's some amount of money. I don't know if it's $4 million, 6, 8, 10, you can come up with different numbers. Some amount of money needs to be paid to Duke, perhaps by the institution that takes Darian Mensah, perhaps by Darian Mensah himself. I don't know where it comes, but there's some money that should be paid to Duke as penalty for Mensah leaving. Which do you think is more likely by a court and an arbitrator?
I think there are two different answers for that, because I think a court is going to be, I wouldn't say that they're likely to do it, but they're more inclined to say, you got to stay at Duke while this is worked out. Arbitration is going to be where they're going to go in and they're going to talk about, obviously all these different things. And an arbitrator's job is not necessarily to say one side is going to win this argument, right? It's not like a court of law where your jury is like, you're either siding for the plaintiff or the defendant. That's the court. The arbitrator is going to try and find an amicable solution for everybody. No one's going to be happy when they go to arbitration, which is why a lot of people like to avoid arbitration. And so, if you look at any terms and conditions, they want to take it to arbitration because they know that most people don't want to go through that. But I think when it comes to the arbitration, they're going to probably side with the monetary damages. They're going to say, hey, look, it's clear that you wanted to leave. It's clear that you knew you couldn't, but you tried to do it anyway. You don't want to stay at Duke, and you don't want to play football for them. Deep down, I don't know. We don't know if Duke wants you to stay or whatever, or they just want to win. But the monetary damages are going to be sufficient. Maybe, Jason, as you mentioned, it could be the $4 million that he was going to be paid this coming season, plus a penalty on top of that, $1 million, whatever that is, right? Then they can maybe argue in court over the monetary damages, like, hey, that's too punitive or what have you. That's too much of a punishment. They could do that after the fact. But I think the amicable solution will eventually be, if they go to arbitration, which I think they end up will, that there's going to be some monetary walk away. Like, okay, Duke's this contract is severed. Darian Mensah can go wherever he wishes. The question is going to be when. And the court is going to have to rule. And I think it's likely that they say until arbitration is done, that he can't sign somewhere else, which means that he would at least remain at Duke for the spring semester. He may not compete in football. He may not be in spring practice or anything like that. If he really wants to go, it might be where it will be after the semester, sometime this summer, when arbitration is completed, that he's able to sign with a school and play immediately. That is more likely than a court saying, no, you have to go back to Duke and play football. There's no ifs, ands, or buts.
Yeah. Let's take a quick break. On the other side, I'm going to try and play a little bit of a larger role in this conversation. We're going to try and get out of some of the legalese and get into sort of what we think might happen and what we sort of want to happen. All those kind of questions. We'll have that for you in just a moment.
Support for Fans First Sports Network comes from Big Fork Brands, bringing bold bacon sausage, paleo pork jerky, and Chicago-style sauces to your table. Enjoy rich, smoky flavors made with sustainable ingredients and chef-crafted care. Big Fork uses 100% heritage hogs raised outdoors without antibiotics and has been featured by Food and Wine, the Chicago Tribune, and QVC for their bold flavors. Listeners visit bigforkbrands.com and receive 20% off at checkout using promo code FFSN. Bigforkbrands.com, promo code FFSN. Thank you for your support of this show.
All right, back from the break. Jason and Donald here discussing Darian Mensah and Duke football and this whole legal rigmarole that both sides are in. Donald, I'm going to go ahead and say...
First of all, rigmarole is a great word, and the fact that you put it in this show is amazing.
I'm here to please. glad I could provide that to you. All right, I'm going to start with this, Donald. I think that there are two possibilities for Duke football. Possibility number one is that, and I think at the moment, possibility number one is the one that Duke wants the most. And possibility number one is that Duke is making this messy. They're making it legal. They're making it take a lot of time. They're making it uncertain. And they could be making it financially very difficult on Darian Mensah. And so I think Duke is hoping that Darian Mensah will go, you know what? The least messy, the easiest answer for all of this is just go back to Duke. I mean, clearly, as of a couple of weeks ago, he was very happy with that. We know that the Duke team was building its offense around the expectation that Darian Mensah would be back. We know that he had a great season, that Duke was preparing. I know, I heard from Duke was preparing to launch a Heisman campaign for Darian Mensah. Duke had brought back almost all the offensive weapons, I guess with the exception of Keyshawn Brown. Duke had brought back all the offensive weapons that Darian Mensah liked throwing to the most, as well as, you know, the running back he liked handing it off to the most. Duke's offense was poised to have a big year. If this was all going to be ugly and difficult and take months and months and months, and Darian Mensah can't enroll anyplace else, he can't continue to work on his game with a team in spring practice, because I got news for you, by the way. If he's not coming back to Duke, he's not playing at Duke spring practice.
Correct.
If he doesn't know, if he's not able to enroll at another school, he's not playing at their spring, he's falling behind. So possibility number one in my book is Darian Mensah's like, you know what? Easiest way out, the way I end all this uncertainty is I go back to the team that I was happy with just a few weeks ago. Possibility number two, I think, is Mensah makes it clear to Duke, I'm not going to play for you. I've got no interest in doing that anymore. You know, you can try and stop me all you want. You can make this as messy as you want. It's not going to happen. I'm never wearing a Duke uniform again. And if Darian Mensah makes that argument and Duke believes him, I think Duke may go, you know what? Let's figure out the number. Let's, you know, you talk to your other school because they're going to probably need to be involved in this because this is a number that you, Darian Mensah, and your family are not going to be happy with. But let's figure out the number. We'll get some money out of this, and you can go on your way. Do you disagree with me that those are the only two real possibilities? I guess the other possibility here is that some arbitrator, some court says the contract means nothing. Darian Mensah is allowed to do whatever he wants. Duke, go F off. I guess that's also, I think that's very, very, very unlikely. What do you say?
There's also a fourth one that, again, I think nationally people are going to be why they're watching this case. And that is this court could use that as an opportunity to render a ruling on the possibility of the existence of an employer-employee relationship, which is something that I know we've kind of talked about with regards to NIL.
Ooh, boy, that is the big stuff, man. That is the big stuff.
Because if that comes into play, and I'm sure Darian Mensah is going to allege that, right? He's going to say in his defense that, okay, they're saying that this contract is about NIL only, but they're suing to keep me to play football for them. So this clearly creates an employee relationship that they say doesn't exist. But if it does exist, then I have additional protections, and then also so do my teammates when it comes to NIL contracts, and that'll open up a lot of doors for unionization and things like that. But I think those are the four things. I think honestly, the one that's probably the most likely is option two. The like, hey, you know what? He don't want to play for us. We don't want a quarterback that doesn't want to be here. Yeah, he may have breached the contract, but let's arrive at that dumb number that we at least will be happy with. They may be upset at, but they'll be willing to pay it, and then we'll get up out of here. That's how most court cases are solved in this country. A compromise where both people walk away from the table not fully happy, right? But it's done, it's settled, and they can go their separate ways. I think that's where we're likely headed.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. I think so. Here's where I am. In the next 5 days or so, maybe a week, the time leading up to that February 2nd court date, which is when the next hearing happens, which is probably going to be, there's going to be a lot of evidence at that hearing. There'll be a lot of filings and things like that. Go.
And I will mention that I did mention that yesterday the old judge had ruled on the temporary restraining order portion of things, but not the preliminary injunction. This February 2nd hearing is called a return hearing. So the new judge, Ed Wilson, who by the way is a UVA and Wake Forest Law alum, so no ties to Duke, but he will get to rule on both again. So basically this TRO is in effect until that hearing, and he can go, hey, right, I want to hear more about the preliminary injunction thing, so we'll keep the TRO in place, or he can issue an entirely new ruling that can set what this case is going to look like.
Yes, but backing up, I was going to say, in the next 10 days, my prediction is, in the next 10 days, we may hear Darian Mensah is going to come back to Duke. If we don't hear that in the next 10 days, I think that ship kind of begins to sail. And that's when we enter into well, let's see who's winning in court to figure out, or who's winning at arbitration or whatever else, to figure out where the number needs to be. But I really think that, at the moment, if Darian Mensah came back and said, guys, you know what, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done this. I got some bad advice and I want to return to Duke, I think Duke would be like, yep, great, cool, drop the lawsuit. Let's get it all together. In fact, I wouldn't be shocked if Duke was like, you know what, we could let's see if we can figure out some way to get you a little more money or something like that. Maybe not to match the Miami offer, but we can do something perhaps here. I think that if that's going to be the outcome, I think it's going to come fairly soon. Because as more time goes by, it becomes harder and harder for Duke to take Darian Mensah back. And it becomes harder and harder for him to enroll in classes and be a part of spring practice and all those other kind of things that really are pretty important to his development as a player and to the development of the team. And it also becomes harder for Duke to figure out how they're moving on, because we have to have a starting quarterback. So, that's, and what's more, Miami has to have a starting quarterback. And there are other teams that are pursuing Darian Mensah that have to, there are just a lot of dominoes that need to fall fairly quickly. So like I say, if that domino is going to fall, it happens quickly. If this lasts for a while, if we're into February, I think then at that point, we're only looking at numbers, 3 million, 5 million, whatever the number may be.
And I think also, as I mentioned, Duke is still looking in the transfer portal actively for another quarterback, because they need to figure out who it's going to be. If it's going to be somebody that's currently on the roster, or again, some quarterback that might still be out there. And there have been reports about some of the guys that Duke might be interested in. If they secure one of those guys, that also changes the calculus, because now Darian Mensah can say, okay, you don't need a starting quarterback anymore. You got your guy. So then again, that's why I say the monetary damages part would come into play, and it'll just be what the number is going to be. Will Duke want to go punitive and say, hey, let's make it so that nobody ever breaks a contract like this again? But I think also, Jason, it opens this up, as I mentioned, we're at a situation now where this case is kind of, again, being watched by so many people for one big reason: roster instability. That's what that's why a lot of people don't like the transfer portal, is because roster instability. They want to still have guys be able to go between schools and go to the school they want to go to, but they want their coaches and they want their schools to be able to say, hey, we got these guys lined up for the next 2 years. We got this offensive line in place, and we got this quarterback in place, and he's not going anywhere. This multi-year deal that Mensah is trying to get out of is going to signal the end of multi-year deals if this case goes a particular direction.
100%.
No school is going to offer it because they'll just say, oh, well, guys are going to attempt to break it after a couple of years. And no player will enter into it because they're going to want the flexibility to negotiate a higher salary after a year. Now, I'll also say this. One thing people need to keep in mind, that this is not a unilateral contract. Contracts are meant to protect both parties. If Darian Mensah, because here in this contract, specifically it says that they won't withhold NIL payments in the case of a bad performance, based on performance. And so if Darian Mensah came to Duke and he sucked, he'd still be getting $4 million this year from this contract. He may not enter the portal. He would be the guy that goes, oh, well, I guess I'm going to be the highest paid, terrible starter in college football. That could have also happened. And Duke wouldn't be able to, I guess Duke could have, but Duke would not have been able to go, oh, it's because you're terrible on the field that we don't want to pay you this money anymore.
And by the way, that's, I haven't had a chance really to comment on this whole thing because I was in Africa. When this happened, there were two thoughts that struck me. And I just want to get into them now, and then we can wrap it up and move on to other stuff. The first one was exactly what you're talking about. I was like, dude signed a 2-year deal. And if he sucked, if he got injured, if any number of bad things happened, if Henry Beelan suddenly turned into the second coming of Joe Burrow or whoever else it may be, and Darian Mensah was useless to Duke, if he'd torn an ACL day one of practice, if he was useless to Duke, Duke would still owe him not $4 million, it's like $3 million, because the $4 million comes from bonuses and stuff, although he earned his bonuses. But Duke would still owe him millions of dollars. How dare Darian Mensah play well and say, oh, I played well, I'm desirable, so I'm going to screw you guys. There was no provision for Duke to screw Darian Mensah. Darian Mensah just said, I'm going to ignore the contract. I'm going to pretend like it doesn't exist. I'm not going to give you a second year, even though I've signed a contract that says I'm required to because I played well. That's total BS, Donald. And that's one of the reasons why I'm thrilled that Duke has filed this lawsuit. So it's just outrageous to me that if he plays like crap, he gets paid, but he plays well and he's allowed to leave? No. And I hope that the courts and the arbitrator and all the other folks will agree that that's just not fair. These contracts can't be one-sided like that. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. Go ahead, respond to that.
No, I think that's a good point because also I'm sure Darian Mensah is going to kind of talk about that, right? Not in this specific way, right? He might feel that, again, your lucid thoughts are an emotional one in part, right? Like, how dare he? That's an emotional response to that.
Of course.
And that's totally fine. And you're totally free to have
that. We're in that section of the show, though, right?
We are in that section. And it brings up a good point because Darian Mensah is going to say that they're acting out of emotion and suing him. Would they have done the same if he had entered the portal 3 weeks ago? When they've had the time to look for a quarterback and maybe go after one of the top quarterbacks? If he had declared for the NFL draft 3 weeks ago, which was a possibility, would they have said, hey, we're still enforcing this contract, you can't enter the NFL draft because that's in here? They could do that, but they probably wouldn't, because if he went to the NFL and got drafted, it would be Darian Mensah, Duke, on every roster that he's ever a part of in the NFL. That also brings in money to Duke and also brings attention to Duke. It'll be just the latest in the line of quarterbacks from Duke that have made it to the NFL recently. If, we're talking about some of the guys who might have left, and we've heard rumblings about guys who might have left, entered the portal last minute because they heard Darian Mensah was entering the portal. Those guys signed contracts too. Is Duke going to enforce those contracts by those players? We haven't heard that yet. Again, Darian Mensah is going to say, okay, if you're not enforcing this other contract, then why the specific performance on me? And again, it's about about him.
I mean, we haven't heard of any of those guys who signed a deal.
I get that, but he has. Right, he knows who. I'm sure they know who is about to enter the portal or who isn't, right, or who may have been talked off the ledge. But my point is,
Donald, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that there were rumors, there was talk of some other Duke guys entering the portal at the last minute, but but we haven't seen any evidence of it. And I'm not
they don't
sure
have
that any
to
of those.
file. It's because they don't have to file until tonight. So again, by 11:59 tonight, we might know
We'll see.
some other things.
We'll see.
But my point is he's going to use that to kind of argue the fact that Duke is acting emotionally in doing this, and that if this was another situation, the timing of it is why people are emotional about it, and we should be. And that's why Duke is pursuing this, because they should. But also, he's going to argue that against them, and it's going to be impended on the judge to go, hey, this again about the specific performance part, about him staying at Duke and being a Duke quarterback part. He's basically trying to say, hey, they had ample time to kind of figure this out, even though I left at the 11th hour. And the judge is going to have to rule whether that's something that applies to the situation to force him to stay at Duke. And then the emotional part of this is, I know as fans, a lot of us don't want that. I certainly don't want a quarterback to stay here if he doesn't want to be here, right? Of course, I would love to have him at Duke, and I'm sure the players, a lot of players will welcome him back. Some may give him some locker room justice and then say, "Okay, we're all good. We're back on the same page. Let's go get this. Let's go get this championship." But if he doesn't want to be here, the question for Duke is, why do you want to keep him? What can we do to make it where you don't have a quarterback that's disgruntled on your roster that you're paying upwards of $4 million to, and make it so that he can go somewhere else and Duke not be aggrieved? That's the question for the judge, and I'm sure that's going to come up in some of these hearings.
Yeah, look, the other thing I was going to say was, I think the timing is really dirty.
Absolutely.
By Darian Mensah. And you guys got into this. Everyone's aware of this. And I think you're right. I'm not sure this lawsuit gets filed if Darian Mensah had entered the portal 3 weeks ago and Duke had time to find a replacement. But the world we live in is he waited till the very, very, very last minute. By the way, the contract that he signed, has timeline requirements that he has also violated. Like, he was required, I want to say it's 72 hours notice or something like that. I forget the exact number, but he didn't give Duke proper notice about him entering the portal. The bottom line is, Duke has few other options. And that is one of the reasons I think that we've seen this response by Duke in terms of a lawsuit, because they have suffered a harm that they can't really come back from. Even though I've heard from folks, Duke has a redshirt freshman named Dan Mahan, who I've heard some good things. People at Duke apparently are fairly excited about him. And if for some reason Mensah does not come back, there are couple little names I've heard associated with Duke in the portal. Duke brought in another guy who they were thinking of as the backup probably, but we'll see it at the spring game who shines and who looks like their best. But I've heard Dan Mahan is a name to keep an eye on if Mensah doesn't come back. But anyway, bottom line in all of this is, the timing makes it worse. I think that if Mensah had told Duke 3 weeks ago, you know what, I really want to go look around, I think that my value is more than what you're paying me, that Duke would have said, all right, well, let's figure something out. Let's try and do this amicably. Make this maybe even, make ending this contract part of your negotiation with the new school. And I think it could have been, a more pleasant experience as opposed to what we have right now. Final word, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I think the other thing about the timing for me, and again, it doesn't matter where he ends up, because this obviously, is whatever. But what I've heard over the last couple of days from people that have sent me this, it doesn't paint Duke in a bad light, but I hate that our name is attached with this situation in this way, and that he's put us in the position that we have to sue to assert our rights. Because the first thing that people say is, yo, Duke's suing your player, like your quarterback? What's up with that? They're not asking that in a way that's bad against Duke, but the question in itself is the question of, what is Duke thinking? What is Duke doing here? Instead of, what did Mensah do that prompted Duke to have to respond this way? And
I'll say really quick. I'll say, because I had casual friends say the same thing to me, and I'm like, it's real simple. The guy signed a 2-year contract and then played well and said, "Oh, I don't want to I don't want to play my second year for you. I want to go someplace else. And then I say, I'm like, can you imagine if a player on your baseball team, basketball, a pro sports team signs a 2-year contract, plays well, and then says, I don't want to play for you anymore. Let me go somewhere else for free. Like, you'd be like, no,
right.
That's not how
Jason,
it works.
But Jason, that's a conversation that you have. The initial question is, what is Duke doing here? Right. And It shouldn't be. It should be, why is Duke in this position? Because we were put in this position. It's not like we proactively said, hey, go breach the contract real quick so we can sue you real quick before the weekend's out. Like, this is something where, and again, this has major implications. It could have major implications across the landscape of NIL and how these contracts are formed.
I think if you're intellectually curious enough to look into the case a little bit, to ask a question about it, if you're right, on the surface you go, why is Duke suing? But if you are really interested enough to try and hear and answer that question, you immediately hear Duke is merely trying to get the guy to follow a contract that was faithfully signed by both parties.
Jason, you're thinking intellectually. That's not how conversations start. That's not how we're playing on sports radio and on the internet and on social media. Again, this is an emotional portion of this. And the emotions that stem from Duke filing this, because people don't know the backstory. Even if they ask, right? They don't know the backstory. And thankfully, some people care enough to ask, but most people aren't. They're just seeing the headline and going, Duke is doing what? And I hate that that's the position that Duke has been forced to put in. That's my point, is the emotional part of this is I hate that Mensah did this at the 11th hour, because the fact that he did has prompted Duke to thrust itself into this national conversation, probably in a way that they didn't want to, via the courts. They want to be the leaders and being proactive about making NIL beneficial for all parties instead of forcing their way through legal measures. And I think that's the long and short of it, is that Darian Mensah put Duke in a very, very bad situation, and they're responding correctly. And I pride Duke in going after the enforcement of this contract, however it's going to be enforced. But I hate that we have to do this because this guy reneged on us at the 11th hour.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. You're not wrong about that. Okay, with that, we are going to go ahead and wrap it up here on the latest edition of the Duke Basketball Roundup, a edition where we did nothing but talk about football. But don't worry, we'll be back at you to talk about basketball. Duke has a big game this weekend against the Wake Forest Demon Deacons, and Donald and I will be here to preview it, coming up in your feed very soon. Until then, he's Donald. I'm Jason, back from Rwanda, and this is the Duke Band playing us out and taking us home.